Bigfoot Reports, 1960s, Part 7. Alaska, Yukon River near Galena, summer 1968. Bob Betts reports that Hazel Strasberg of Galena saw a big hair-covered man on the north bank of the river from her boat at dusk. Bradfield Canal area, July 1969. J.W. Huff of Ward Cove, Alaska, was quoted in the Bigfoot Bulletin. I've been working for another mining company during this past season, and one of my camps was in the Bradfield Canal general area at an elevation of 2,300 feet. We were flown in by helicopter late in the afternoon, and as soon as the copter was unloaded, it immediately departed for Ketchikan. We started to set up our camp and prepare for operations. Shortly after the copter departed, I happened to look up at a ridge about 300 feet above us and 500 yards away. I saw a man standing there watching us. I remarked to my partner that I thought we were in someone else's area and might have to move the next day. My partner and I watched this man for 10 or 15 minutes, expecting him to come down to our camp and inform us it was his area. We were prepared to leave if needed. He stood absolutely motionless. We had a good look at him, and he appeared to be extremely large. He had no hat and looked very dark. We got the impression he had no clothing. After watching him for a while, I resumed working on the tent while my partner continued watching. He then yelled at the man and waved to him, whereupon the man took off with a lumbering gait rather rapidly and soon disappeared over the ridge from our sight. Yukon near Keno Hill, Yukon, about 1969, a man from Keno Hill and an indigenous guide reportedly came upon several mounds in the snow that were steaming. The guide insisted they leave immediately. As they departed, they looked back and saw what appeared to be an ape stand up from one of the mounds. Alberta, Banff National Park, August 1968. Gerald Martin of Kalamazoo, Michigan, wrote to Roger Patterson that he and his family watched a large, black, upright figure walking on a ridge east of the highway, opposite the Columbia ice fields. It was a long distance away, but all of them felt it was too large and moving too fast to be human. West of Nordegg, Alberta, September 1969. Footprints 17 inches and 13 inches long were found by indigenous residents on the Kootenay Plains, near where the Cline River joins the North Saskatchewan River. These were photographed by George Harris of Squamish, who was then living in Nordegg. West of Nordegg, spring and summer 1969, the Edmonton Journal, August 30th, 1969, reported several sightings of hairy giants by members of an indigenous group led by Chief Joe Smallboys. The group had recently left their reserve near Edmonton and settled in an uninhabited area just east of Banff National Park. West of Nordegg, August 24th, 1969, 5 men working on the construction of the Bighorn Dam on the North Saskatchewan River saw a dark, upright figure on the riverbank about half a mile away, which they watched for about an hour. 2 of them, Stan and Harley Peterson of Condor, told John Green that, based on comparisons with known objects and people, they estimated the figure to be 3 times the height of a man. Near Banff, Alberta, September 1969, a man from Drayton Valley, Alberta, who chose to remain anonymous, wrote to John Green about an experience he and 2 others had at the Kananaskis Lakes, Ribbon Creek area. While on a weekend prospecting trip, we built a fire at noon to heat canned food. After sitting for about half an hour, someone said, "Hey, what's that?" About 100 yards away, we saw what looked like a gorilla sitting on its haunches, watching us. I wanted to head for the car, and so did the other person, but he said, "Wait a minute," in a whisper. The animal sat like that for about 5 minutes, then got up and chattered its teeth as if it were cold. It moved its arms up and down. After it left, we walked to where it had been sitting. We couldn't find any tracks, but we agreed it stood at least 7 to 8 feet tall. A sketch included with the letter indicated the creature was female with long, droopy breasts, a pointed head, long arms, and long brownish hair. Idaho, near Riggins, June 16th, 1968, the Idaho County Free Press reported that Frank Bond, while fishing alone at French Creek, saw two 8-foot gray, hair-covered hominoids. Later, a game guide collected several strands of light-colored hair from the area, which were found to be unidentifiable and appeared to have both human and animal characteristics. Near Golden, Idaho, summer 1968. C.E. Ricketts of Oregon wrote to John Green saying that while at a mining camp, it was raided by a mysterious creature. His two associates said they had seen something resembling a man in a buffalo coat. Later, he sent Green a clipping from the Daily Chronicle, Centralia, Washington, dated May 10th or 11th, 1969. It quoted a letter sent to the sheriff of Skamania County by Fred J. Richardson, then of Centralia, later of Grangeville, Idaho. In part, it read, "Last summer, two of us were working a placer claim on the South Fork of the Clearwater River near Golden, Idaho. We lived in a tent made of sheet plastic and started work around 6 a.m. each day. On occasion, we'd return to camp around 9 a.m. and found signs that something had been there. Articles had been picked up off a flimsy table and placed on the ground. Our garbage can, which held dry food, was knocked over, and a 5-pound sack of pancake flour was missing. A 10-pound bag of flour had bite marks in it, but hadn't been eaten. On our table was an open jar of honey and a jar of jam, with jam dripping down the side, apparently untouched. A 3-pound can of coffee with a plastic lid had teeth marks and punctures. We followed a trail of pancake flour across a creek and into the timber, where we found the empty sack. The trail led from the sack to our camp, indicating the creature entered and left from the same direction. The tracks were about a foot long and 2 to 2.5 times wider at the front than the heel, resembling a swim fin. Later that day, we cautiously returned to camp and saw the creature, more cinnamon-colored than before. At first, we thought it was a bear, but it was watching us from across a dam. From that distance, a bear wouldn't have noticed us. It moved up a bank in a way unlike any bear. Only after hearing of other sightings did we realize what we had seen. The creature preferred salty pancake flour over sweeter items like sugar and jam. At the location of the empty sack, there was a brimstone-like odor, similar to wet matches being struck. We smelled this in several other remote places on our claim. Others in the area had similar experiences and also reported the odor. Mr. Ricketts noted they heard wailing sounds at night, as though something were signaling. Near McCall, Idaho, fall 1968. Roy Fleetwood wrote to Roger Patterson that he had seen a Bigfoot-type creature while driving a log skidder. North of Orofino, Idaho, June 1969, Russell Gebhardt investigated reports of a creature seen at a mill 20 miles north of Orofino. A night watchman claimed he saw a female Sasquatch inside the mill. It was about 6 feet tall, covered in shiny dark hair, except for its face, hands, and the nipple area of its very large breasts. The visible skin was pink. Its eyes were large and fiery red. The creature was built like a stocky person but had very long arms. It walked upright and gracefully but emitted a very unpleasant odor. Bigfoot Encounters, Part 2. Washington, near Stevens Pass, September 17, 1967. Clarence Fox, along with a group of 9th grade students on a hike, found a pile of conifer twigs 4 feet high and 6 to 8 feet in diameter in a cave on the Cascade Crest Trail north of Stevens Pass. On the way home, they smelled a bad odor and found a few tracks 17 inches long. The next day, one of the students, Lynn Madden, returned and made a cast of a clear track that had appeared since the previous day. Mr. Fox later heard that members of an alpine club had reported similar tracks about 2 miles away near Marietta. Late October 1967, Marietta, Mrs. Washington told John Green she found 18-inch tracks in patches of soft mud behind her house. The tracks passed under the clothesline, which was 4 or 5 feet off the ground. Her husband and sons also saw them. Later that same month, in the late evening, Rita Lawrence ran out of her bedroom and told her brother, Frank Jr., that a hand covered with dark hair, except on the knuckles and fingers, had reached into the room through the window and started feeling around. Frank ran into the room, but the intruder was gone. A few days later, he heard something near an empty house across the road. Investigating, he rounded a corner and confronted an erect, hair-covered creature about 7 feet tall, dark in color, with a flat face and no neck. It ran off. Near Chehalis, fall 1967, Roger Patterson interviewed Billy Brown of Chehalis, who said that while hunting near his home by the Chehalis River about 4 miles outside the city, he heard rustling in the brush where a railroad trestle crossed a swamp. About 30 yards ahead, a white Sasquatch stepped up onto the trestle. He described it as about 8 feet tall, 3 feet across the shoulders, with a flat face and long, shaggy hair. Its movements were very quick. He shot at its head with a shotgun. It screamed like a pig, grabbed its head, and ran into the swamp. He fired 4 more shots at its back, then ran home. Returning with older boys, they found blood in the water but couldn't track the creature. He claimed to have seen it several times before in an old apple orchard and believed it ate apples. He hadn't seen it since the shooting. Near Marietta, early December 1967, Frank Lawrence Jr. told John Green that around dusk, about a half-mile up the Nooksack River from the village, he heard something splashing. Another man was in the boat with him. By spotlight, they saw a dark, hair-covered animal walking up the bank and disappearing into the mist in the fields. It was about 6 feet tall, medium-heavy build, with a slight stoop, flat face, and no neck. Its eyes reflected red. Oregon. Near the Dalles, 1965. Miss Darlene Brown wrote to Roger Patterson saying that at twilight, while driving west of the Dalles, she and another girl saw a Sasquatch sitting behind some rocks on a hill near a gravel pit. She saw it 3 different times in the same location. Another time, a friend walking past the gravel pit also saw it sitting there. Near Lakeview, December 1966, a woman told Renee Dahinden and John Green a story relayed to her by an Oakland youth who had been cutting Christmas trees near Lakeview. Their Alsatian dog rushed into the snow vehicle, frightened. An upright creature appeared from the bush. Later, several men saw big tracks in the snow. One said they were from snow falling off trees. Another disagreed, saying they were foot-shaped with a regular 48-inch stride. Adele, May 1967. Dennis Taylor told Roger Patterson that he and other youths frequently watched a Sasquatch cross the freeway near the cemetery, heading to the river at around 11:30 p.m. and back at 4 a.m. Sometimes there was more than one. They shot at the creatures several times. Once, one was knocked down with buckshot, but leapt up and ran through a barbed wire fence, knocking down 3 posts. The creature was said to be 9 feet tall, weighing half a ton. Its eyes glowed red. Near Dallas, fall 1967, Ben Chapman told John Furman that a friend and 2 other hunters saw human-like tracks near an abandoned house about 7 miles south of Dallas. The prints went around a fence instead of over it. Warm Springs Reservation, fall 1967. Clyde Staley of Portland said a road contractor told him that giant human-like tracks were found near Trout Lake and photographed by a sheriff's deputy. The deputy's wife said she had heard about the tracks and a trailer being violently shoved. The sheriff didn't respond to Green's letter. Above Clackamas Valley, southeast of Molalla, October 1967. A logger told John Green he saw a Sasquatch family, father, mother, and baby, eating ground squirrels dug from a rock pile. He watched them for several minutes unnoticed. Northeastern Oregon, fall 1967. Russell Giebhart reported Joe Jackson saw a large, hair-covered creature standing by the road near Horse Creek and the Grand Ronde River at 3:30 a.m. It ran into the bush as he approached. California, 1960s, Blue Lake near Bluff Creek, July 1965. Steve Saunders wrote to George Hawes that one of 2 other youths he shared a tent with awoke to see a large finger or a stick slowly opening the tent flap. He yelled and something ran off. The next morning, they found several indistinct tracks and one perfect one in the dust by the fire pit. It was 17 inches long and almost 7 inches across the ball. Near Hesperia, September 1965, Ken interviewed a Victorville couple who told him they were sitting at their campfire at the mouth of Deep Creek when a monster approached within a few feet of their fire, then followed them when they fled to their truck. It was about 8 feet tall, heavily built, with a head like a football helmet. The eyes shone yellow-green. Wildwood, California, January 1966. The Reading Record Searchlight reported that Bob Kelly and Archie Bradshaw saw a Bigfoot peering in their cabin window at 2 a.m. and later found big tracks in the snow. W.L. Hampton of Platina told Jim McLaren that many people saw the tracks, 15 to 18 inches long and 30 inches deep in the snow, with long strides. He said Mr. Kelly shot at the creature with a shotgun and thought he hit it. The trail led into Hayfork Creek near Platina. Winter 1966, Mr. Hampton said that at their house 2 miles west of Platina, after an absence of 2 days, he and his wife found 17 to 18-inch tracks with long strides 8 inches deep in the snow. Where they climbed a bank, there were what appeared to be elbow prints with impressions of hair in them. The door of his house was broken off its hinges. Bluff Creek, 1966, Jim McLaren reports that Richard Sides of Fort Eustis, Virginia, said he saw a Bigfoot squatting at the edge of the creek, drinking with cupped hands. Trinity Alps, April 1966. Nick Campbell of Pomona told Ken that on April 3rd, upon arriving at a campsite north of Weaverville, he and friends saw something large and dark run down a very steep bank. That night, something was throwing the trash cans around, and one of the group shone a flashlight under the edge of the tent and saw a Sasquatch, which turned and stared at the light, dropped the can in its hands, and walked off. The next day, 3 miles west of camp, they saw the creature again while eating lunch and spent half an hour playing hide-and-seek with it until it finally went away. Several of them saw it. It was seen once more on that trip, raided the trash 2 more times, and took some raw bacon and eggs they left out for it. North of Fontana, August 27, 1966. Ken interviewed Mrs. Jerry Lou Oberlis of Fontana, who said that about 5 miles north of the city, where some boys had recently claimed to have seen an ape in a tree, she was driving slowly along when an animal came out of some bushes and grabbed at her through the car window, scratching her. She described the creature as 7 feet tall, very heavy and dark, and with a strong odor. A UPI report carried by many papers at the time said the animal was covered with moss and slime. Near Willow Creek, spring or summer 1967, Jim McLaren quotes Russell Somerville of Ventura as saying he was resting in the shade by the highway half a mile west of Willow Creek in mid-afternoon when an 8 or 9 foot brown woolly creature with a strong odor came down the hill, walked along the road for 40 or 50 feet, then disappeared into the trees. Onion Mountain, west of Bluff Creek, late August 1967. Still McCoy called from Willow Creek to tell John Green that a road crew had found tracks on a dirt road around a water wagon. He photographed and cast a few that were still visible when John got there. Some were the familiar 15-inch tracks. The others were 13-inch tracks. Blue Creek Mountain, west of Bluff Creek, end of August 1967. The same 15 and 13-inch tracks were found by Bud Ryerson on the road he was building. He reported there was also a smaller track, about 12 inches. The creatures had evidently scattered some small tractor parts on the road and wandered along and off and on the road for 600 yards. They came onto the road at the same point, but left at different places. 2 days after the tracks were made, Renee Dahinden and John Green counted 590 tracks remaining and made several photographs and casts. Don Abbott of the BC Museum later did the same. Tracks of the same 2 creatures made on a sandbar in Bluff Creek the same night were also cast and photographed, as was a 12-inch track, which could have been a human track. that appeared a day or two later where the Onion Mountain tracks had been. Near Notice Creek, September 25, 1967. Jim McLaren reports that Dan Mullins of Hoopa found Bigfoot tracks and an unopened case of oil cans crushed. Bluff Creek, October 1967. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin photographed a female Sasquatch while riding a creek on horseback. They rounded a bend and saw a dark animal squatting beside the creek on the opposite bank. This was 3 or 4 miles beyond the sandbar where tracks had frequently appeared in earlier years, and a few hundred yards past the sandbar where tracks were found at the end of August. Their horses reared when they encountered the animal, and Roger fell. But the creature stood and watched them as he untangled himself. It started to walk away just before he managed to get his 16mm movie camera out of his saddlebag. He then ran after it, stopped, and took pictures from about 80 feet away. Because he was running or winding the camera much of the time, only a few clear frames exist, showing a couple of strides and the creature turning to look at the cameraman. Even these frames are not sharp because of camera motion. Nevertheless, it shows with quite sufficient clarity an extremely heavily built creature covered with black hair, standing close to 7 feet high, slightly stooped, and with its knees always somewhat bent. It has large drooping breasts. No facial details can be seen, but it is obviously a flat face without a snout, and its head sits right in its shoulders with no neck. The creature left footprints 14.5 inches long, 2 of which Roger and Bob Gimlin cast. Bob Titmus cast 10 more a couple of weeks later. It is not one of the usual Bluff Creek prints, although it might have been the same one Ivan Marks found on the Cedar Camp Road in April 1960. Reports from the 1960s, Part 7, Alaska and Yukon. Yukon River near Galena, summer 1968. Bob Betts reported that Hazel Strasberg of Galena saw a big, hair-covered man on the north bank of the river from her boat at dusk. Bradfield Canal area, July 1969. J.W. Huff of Ward Cove, Alaska, was quoted in the Bigfoot Bulletin. I've been working for another mining company during this past season, and one of my camps was in the Bradfield Canal general area at an elevation of 2,300 feet. We were flown in by helicopter late in the afternoon. As soon as the copter was unloaded, it immediately departed for Ketchikan. We began setting up camp and preparing for operations. Shortly after the departure of the helicopter, I happened to look up at a ridge about 300 feet above us and approximately 500 yards away. I saw a man standing there watching us. I remarked to my partner that we must be in someone else's area and might need to move. My partner and I watched this man for 10 or 15 minutes, expecting him to come down to our camp to speak with us. But he stood absolutely motionless. We got a good look at him. He appeared to be extremely large, and as we continued watching, it became apparent he had no hat or clothing and looked very dark. I resumed working on the tent while my partner continued to observe. He then yelled and waved at the man. At that moment, the figure took off with a lumbering gait, rather rapidly, and soon disappeared over the ridge from our sight. Circa 1969, a man from Keno Hill and an indigenous guide reportedly came upon a number of mounds in the snow emitting steam. The guide insisted they leave immediately. As they departed and looked back, they saw what appeared to be an ape stand up from one of the mounds. Banff National Park, Alberta, August 1968. Gerald Martin of Kalamazoo, Michigan, wrote to Roger Patterson that he and his family observed a large black upright figure walking on a ridge east of the highway opposite the Columbia ice fields. It was very far away, but all agreed it was too large and moving too fast to be human. Footprints 17 and 13 inches long were found by indigenous residents living on the Kootenai Plains, near where the Cline River joins the North Saskatchewan. These were photographed by George Harris of Squamish, then living in Nordegg. West of Nordegg, spring and summer 1969. The Edmonton Journal, August 30th, 1969, reported several sightings of hairy giants by members of an indigenous group led by Chief Joe Smallboys. The group had recently left their reserve near Edmonton and settled in an uninhabited area east of Banff National Park. West of Nordegg, August 24th, 1969, 5 men working on the construction of the Bighorn Dam on the North Saskatchewan River saw a dark, upright figure on the riverbank about half a mile away, which they watched for an hour. 2 of them, Stan and Harley Peterson of Condor, told John Green that after comparing it with people who later went to the same spot, they estimated it to be 3 times the height of a man. Near Banff, Alberta, September 1969. A man from Drayton Valley, Alberta, who wished to remain anonymous, wrote to John Green describing an experience he and 2 others had at Kananaskis Lake's Ribbon Creek area. While on a weekend prospecting trip, we built a fire around noon to heat some canned food. We'd been sitting for about half an hour when someone said, "Hey, what's that?" About 100 yards away, we saw what looked like a gorilla sitting on its haunches, watching us. I wanted to head for the car, and so did the other person, but he whispered, "Wait a minute." The creature sat like that for 5 minutes, then got up and chattered its teeth like it was cold while moving its arms up and down. After it left, we went to the spot. There were no clear tracks, but we all agreed it stood at least 7 to 8 feet tall. A sketch included with the letter indicated the creature was female with long, droopy breasts, a pointed head, long arms, and long, brownish hair. Near Riggins, Idaho, June 16, 1968. The Idaho County Free Press reported that Frank Bond, while fishing alone at French Creek, saw 2 8-foot-tall gray, hair-covered hominoids. Later, a game guide collected several strands of light-colored hair from the site. These were found to be unidentifiable and had both human and animal characteristics. Near Golden, Idaho, summer 1968. C.E. Ricketts of Oregon wrote to John Green stating he was at a mining camp that was raided by a mysterious creature. His 2 associates said they saw something resembling a man in a buffalo coat. Later, Ricketts sent John Green a clipping from the Daily Chronicle, Centralia, Washington, May 10th or 11th, 1969, quoting a letter sent to the sheriff of Skamania County by Fred J. Richardson, then of Centralia, later of Grangeville, Idaho. Last summer, 2 of us were working a placer claim on the South Fork of the Clearwater River near Golden, Idaho. We lived in a tent made of sheet plastic. Starting work around 6 a.m. daily, we sometimes returned to camp by 9 a.m. We noticed things disturbed. Items removed from our flimsy table, our dry food garbage can knocked over, and a 5-pound bag of pancake flour missing. Our visitor had bitten into a 10-pound bag of flour but hadn't eaten it. A jar of honey and jam were left untouched, but a 3-pound can of coffee had teeth marks and punctures on the plastic lid. We found a trail of pancake flour on the ground, followed it across a creek and up a hill. There, we found the empty sack. We searched for tracks and found some heading toward camp, indicating the creature came and left from the same direction. The tracks were about a foot long and 2 to 2.5 times as wide at the front than the heel, like a swim fin. Later that day, we cautiously returned to camp and saw the creature. It had a cinnamon color, and at first we thought it might be a bear, but its behavior and movement weren't like any bear. We later heard of other sightings in the area. From what we experienced, it preferred salty pancake flour to sweet things like sugar or jam. Where we found the empty flour sack, there was a brimstone-like odor, like struck wet matches. We later noticed this smell in other isolated spots on the claim. Others in the area reported the same odor. We also heard wailing sounds at night, as if something were signaling another. Near McCall, Idaho, fall 1968. Roy Fleetwood wrote to Roger Patterson that he had seen a Bigfoot-type creature while driving a log skidder north of Orofino, Idaho. Orofino, Idaho, June 1969, Russell Gebhardt investigated reports of a creature seen at a mill 20 miles north of Orofino. A night watchman said he saw a female Sasquatch inside the mill. It was about 6 feet tall, covered with shiny dark hair except for its face, hands, and the nipple area of its very large breasts. The visible skin was pink, and the eyes were large and fiery red. The creature was built like a very heavy, stocky person, but had very long arms. It walked upright, gracefully, but had a very unpleasant odor. Below Priest Rapids Dam, March 1970, Bill Harwood of Portland, interviewed by Roger Patterson, said that he heard a noise outside his camper. He looked out with a flashlight and saw a hair-covered human-like creature about 4 feet away. It was light in color, 8 or 9 feet tall, and not particularly heavily built. He went in and closed the door. When he looked again with a lantern, it was gone. Near Stevens Pass, March 20th, 1970, Greg Lee of Snohomish filed a computer form stating that he and a companion saw tracks at about 5,000 feet in new snow. They were only 11 to 12 inches long, but 5 inches wide with 5 toes. The tracks came down off the mountain to the top of a ski lift, then went back up. Near Copolis Crossing, May 1970, about midnight, Diane Higby, Becky Figg, and Rosemary Tucker of Cullis Beach saw a 7-foot creature in the headlights, standing erect, very heavy, and covered with silver-tipped hair. Near Skamania, June 1970, Leroy Baxter of Skamania told John Green he and another man saw 2 18-quarter-inch tracks, 9 inches wide, in the dust on a clearing half a mile up Woodward Creek. They were 8 feet apart. Mount St. Helens, June 1970, National Wildlife, October-November 1970, tells of an expedition led by Bob Morgan of Miami, Florida, which found huge humanoid tracks in 2 different places on the mountain, 2 days apart. Near Tahola, June 1970, Alan Ebling of Pacific Beach told John Green he and a group of youth went to look at a place where rocks were supposed to have been thrown at some workmen. By the car lights, they saw an 8-foot, heavy, dark form leaning against a tree. They left. The next day, there was nothing by the tree. Near North Bend, June 14, 1970, a Yakima man told Roger Patterson that he, his wife, and another couple were sleeping out on an old road close to the freeway. He and the other man were imitating wolf and panther calls when suddenly they were approached by a 9-foot creature, very broad with eyes that shone whitish yellow. It had a domed head, a bull neck, and carnivorous teeth. The hair was brown and neat. They all piled into the car. It stayed around much of the night. North Gorge Campground, north of Bossburg, July 3rd, 1970. Norm Davis of KCVL Radio in Colville reported that his daughter, Lavon, found 18-inch tracks leading in and out of a lake. Mount Rainier National Park, July 9th, 1970. Wayne Thuringer of Kent, Washington, told John Green that he and a companion were on a trail between Sunrise Point and Mystic Lake, about 7,000 feet up at around 2 p.m., when they heard a noise like someone blowing into a bottle. They stayed still and watched as a large, hair-covered animal, very heavy, emerged out of the brush and crossed the trail. It was dark brown, about 8 feet high, somewhat bent at the waist and knees, and its face was ape-like. Yakima, Washington, July 10th, 1970. An Auburn, Washington man filed a computer report stating that within the city limits, but with the closest house 3 or 4 blocks away, he and some friends saw a very tall, very heavy creature standing in a small dike by their swimming hole, staring at them. It was hair-covered, dark, and had an ape-like face. They shot at it with a .22, but it did not move. They ran. Cub Lake, east of Darrington, summer 1970. A man from Bellingham, spending his spare time searching the area where 2 boys reported seeing 3 Sasquatches the previous summer, reported finding tracks several times. Once, he said, he saw a Sasquatch peering out of a bush beside the trail. He shot a color slide of it, badly out of focus, which does contain the blurred outline of an ape-like face. Beacon Rock Park, east of Skamania, July 31st, 1970. A Portland man filed a computer report stating that he saw a hair-covered creature sleeping in a cave. It was dark, and he could only see the foot clearly. It was human-shaped with flat toenails. He thought the creature was asleep, but then the toes twitched, so he departed. Near Walla Walla, August 15th, 1970. The Walla Walla Union Bulletin, August 30th, 1970, reports that Rich Myers of Walla Walla, riding a motorcycle on Mill Creek Road in the Blue Mountains, saw a creature 10 to 12 feet high, shadow-like, in the bush at dusk. He also heard it scream. Its arms were outstretched, and it had pale palms. Near Skamania, August 19th, 1970. Mrs. Louise Baxter of Skamania got out of her car to check if she had a flat tire near Beacon Rock Trailer Park. I kicked the tire, which was okay, and then bent over to see if possibly something was stuck under the fender to make the noise. I suddenly felt as if I was being watched, and without straightening up, I looked toward the wooded area beside the road and looked straight into the face of the biggest creature I have ever seen, except the one time nearly a year before. The creature was coconut brown, shaggy, and dirty looking. It had one huge fist up to its mouth. The mouth was partly open, and I saw a row of large square teeth. The head was big and seemed to be set right onto the shoulders. The ears were not visible due to the long hair about the head. It seemed the hair was about 2 inches long on its head. It had a jutted chin and receding forehead. The nose and upper lip were less hairy, and the nose was wide with big nostrils. The eyes were the most outstanding, as they were amber-colored and seemed to glow like an animal's eyes at night when car lights catch them. It seemed contented there and seemed to be eating, as the left fist was up toward the mouth as though it had something in it. I screamed and hollered, but whether I made any noise, I can't tell. I was so terrified. I know it didn't move while I looked. I don't remember how I got back in the car and how I started it. As I pulled out, I could see it still standing there, all 10 or 12 feet of him. Near Cascade Pass, August 8th, 1970. Dick Grover reported to the Bigfoot Bulletin that Ronald Zimmerman of Seattle saw a light-colored creature, 6 feet or more high and very large-stomached, by a stream in an alpine meadow in Boston Basin, near Ellensburg, November 6, 1970. Oscar D. Hickerson of Renton, Washington, sent John Green 3 footprint pictures he took on Coleman Ridge, about 20 miles northeast of Ellensburg, at the beginning of elk season. He wrote as follows: "We drove into our hunting camp Thursday, November 5th, 1970, and set up camp. That night it snowed 6 to 8 inches, and the next morning we cut wood with our chainsaws and were splitting logs when a hunter from a camp below us told us about some large human-like tracks going through the camp next to him. He was real excited and said he was going to sleep with his gun loaded and wasn't going into the woods while that monster was in there. I told him someone probably strapped some large false feet on their shoes and made those tracks to scare someone. He said that was not so, because no human could step over 3-foot logs with snow on them and not disturb the snow. After cutting and splitting enough wood to last a week, we walked down to see the tracks. The sun had come out, but the tracks were still in good shape, and I took 3 slide pictures. We tracked the Sasquatch through the woods, and he circled all through the timber approximately 3 miles before he got out of the snow and went into Coleman Creek Canyon. I had to slide over some snow-covered logs he stepped over, which disproved my theory that someone put on false feet. Another thing that convinced me that these tracks were not made by an ordinary man is the depth in the snow. I weigh 185 pounds, and if I put something on my feet 17 inches long and 9 inches wide, it would be like wearing snowshoes, and depth penetration would be very little in comparison to these tracks. North Cascades, winter 1971. Flying and on foot, the Bellingham man who took the blurred slides in the summer reported seeing big tracks in the snow in several different areas, once east of Mount Baker. His passenger said he watched through binoculars a big, erect figure at the edge of a clearing at about 8,000 feet. Near Quinault, winter 1971. Lyle Erdahl of Quinault wrote to John Green that he and 2 school friends, looking for elk, found tracks in the snow 14 inches long and 7 inches wide. Deming near Bellingham, January 10, 1971. Dick Grover reported to the Bigfoot Bulletin that Gary Willett and his daughter saw tracks 14 to 16 inches long and over 7 inches wide in fresh snow crossing their backyard. Tenino, March 2, 1971. The Daily Olympian, March 3, 1971, reported that Charles Smith and Margie Baker saw a 7-foot, shaggy-haired creature approach their car late at night and pat it on the top. The paper said it then got down on all fours and ran off. Mrs. Elmer Dodge of Tenino wrote to John Green that she had talked to the two witnesses and they said that it did not get down. It stayed on 2 feet all the time. I'm Kelly Miller, and welcome to Bigfoot Case Files. December 1974. The witness and his young family were on their way home to Denver from Los Angeles for the Christmas holidays when the sighting occurred. In the late afternoon, while traveling on Route 66 just west of Flagstaff, Arizona, the witness hit a strong snowstorm and pulled off to the side of the road to gain his bearings and check his map. He thought he might be lost because he hadn't seen another vehicle for miles and didn't even see any tire tracks in the snow covering the highway. He was driving a VW Beetle, which he left idling on the south side of the highway. While looking for the map, he glanced up to catch the sight of what appeared to be a large, bulky, two-legged figure running toward their stopped car from the rear. He mentioned that the figure had unusually long arms and legs for a man. The head appeared pyramid-shaped but rounded on top. It appeared to be covered in black or dark brown fur, and no clothes were observed. From his vantage point inside the car, he estimated the figure's height to be near 10 feet tall. He quickly put the car in gear. Feeling threatened and that his family might be in danger, he tried to accelerate away from the fast-approaching figure. The witness stated that the creature actually chased his car and came within 15 feet of the rear of his vehicle before he reached a speed of 45 miles per hour and began to put some distance between himself and the figure. The figure remained on 2 legs for the duration of the encounter and at one point even raised its arms over its head. When asked why he thought it wasn't a human, he responded that they did consider the possibility of a stranded motorist seeking help, but he didn't see anything to indicate another human was anywhere near his position. No other vehicles, no tire tracks in the snow, no headlights, nothing. Also, the figure was too tall to be a normal human being. The head was too large and sloped down toward the shoulders. The speed at which it was running in the snow was amazing. The face was pretty much covered with the same color as the rest of its body, almost black, maybe a little lighter. At the time, the witness was 24 years old and a member of the U.S. Navy. He did not believe in the existence of Bigfoot-type creatures. He assumed any reports of such creatures, or the Yeti, were hoaxes or imagined. The experience changed his perspective, and he is now a firm believer in the existence of Sasquatch. He currently works for the U.S. Squack Mint in Denver. July 1983, Oak Creek Canyon. My family at the time was very much into camping, and to this day I still hunt and fish whenever the opportunity presents itself. We went somewhere in the Oak Creek Canyon Slide Rock area and camped along the river. As usual, I took off on my own to fish. I was fishing along the bank, and behind me the forest was heavily treed with dense underbrush. I heard footsteps, not typical steps, but heavy, thumping steps. When I turned to look, I saw nothing, and the thumping seemed to stop. When I decided to get back to the more serious business of trout fishing, I heard it again. I looked around, and this time, when it stopped, I heard very heavy, deep breathing. I was scared and flattened my back against a tree, trying to peer around. I searched for the source of the noise, but could not locate it. I waited. I tried to make myself small. I was only 13. I stayed still for 20 minutes, my back pressed flat against the tree, trying to look around without moving much. All the while, I could hear the thumping walking sound and sometimes breathing. It sounded so close. Finally, it stopped. I regained some courage, shrugged it off as my imagination, and started fishing again. But I was still nervous. I felt watched. Again, the thumping and breathing. This time to my left, I saw it. A shadow in the dark woods, but an unmistakable one. I saw a dark brown or black body, maybe 3-inch fur, shaggy looking, 6 to 7 feet tall, moving away at an angle approximately 35 to 40 feet away. As soon as I saw him, he was gone. The woods were thick. We had a lab, and he would follow me everywhere if I let him. He was not well trained and could be a handful, but he feared nothing. Several times during the night and once during the day, I found him all the way in the back of the tent, shivering uncontrollably and refusing to come out. In fact, when I tried to force the issue a bit, he fought me and remained inside the tent, scared and shaking. July 1990, Highway 180 between the Grand Canyon and Flagstaff. My girlfriend at the time and I took a trip from our home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to Los Angeles to visit my mother. On our trip home, we decided to stop by the Grand Canyon in Arizona because she had never seen it. We got there late in the afternoon and stayed to view the sunset over the canyon. We departed for Flagstaff soon after it had gotten dark. We headed down a less traveled stretch of road as a shortcut. The road had next to no traffic, and my friend and I took advantage of the time to talk. The highway was very curvy. We had just come out of a turn into a fairly long straightaway when we noticed something walking on the right side of the road on the shoulder. Note, the rest of this took place in a matter of a few short minutes, although it seemed like an hour. What we saw was walking upright like a man, but was noticeably larger. As we got closer, my girlfriend said, "Is that a bear?" It was at that moment that it became visible that our companion on the road was covered head to toe in brown to light brown fur or hair. That was also the moment I realized what we were looking at. I'd seen enough TV and heard enough hunting stories from my dad. I stopped the car. Our headlights now shone into the area, and the Bigfoot could see them. It stopped as well. We were about 50 yards apart at this point, maybe closer. It then turned to face us. I'll never forget this moment. It's burned into my memory. At first, the animal turned its head slightly to look back, but its head seemed attached to its chest, so it had to turn completely to face us. We didn't make a sound. We were in complete shock. Our friend was about 7 feet tall and covered head to toe in hair. The body was somewhat without definition. I didn't make out features like hips or gender. The arms seemed abnormally long, maybe to just above the knee. The face was mostly hairless and looked, well, without something else to compare it to, kind of like a character from Planet of the Apes. Not exactly, but this creature definitely was from the ape family, with just a touch of human looks. The eyes seemed to glow a bit green, like a cat or dog in the headlights. It stood there for a matter of seconds, and I could tell it was thinking about its next move. It ran its tongue across the front of its upper teeth in ponderance. It took one small step in our direction. My girlfriend went berserk. She screamed in horror. It stopped its forward movement, looked around, and headed into the woods near the road in a couple of strides. We never got another look at it. My girlfriend quickly composed herself and wanted out of the area. I agreed. We took off, and I made a wide turn around the area where the Bigfoot had once stood. I never got the feeling that it meant us any harm, but it was very curious about what we were. You couldn't convince my girlfriend of that, though. The event shocked her for life. She refused to ever talk about it again. To this day, I'm sure she's blocked it out. I, on the other hand, will never forget it. It took me years before I could tell my wife about my encounter. I'm only telling my story for my own therapy and in the hope that it will help someone else who has gone through something like this. Greetings. This incident happened in the summer of 2018. It was a nice summer evening. The forecast was partly cloudy, and the temperature was over 25 degrees Celsius. First of all, I'm an indigenous man and have been a firm believer in the big man, as we call him in our indigenous community, that the Opasquayak Cree Nation. There are many tales of him in our community, and he should be respected if we see him. This is my tale. My cousin DB and I, SB, decided to take our sons to the local resort called Pioneer Bay, which has a campground and a sandy beach that stretches along Clearwater Lake, a very beautiful place during the summer. We were traveling in his SUV, listening to Kiss with our sons in the back seat. I was looking out the window. When we were close, maybe a couple of clicks down the highway, with trees on both sides. On my side, there were railroad tracks, then the forest line. As we traveled, I caught something just inside the tree line. My eyes locked on it. I turned to my cousin, turned down the volume, and said, "DB, turn around, turn around." But my cousin was doing at least 110 kilometers per hour. He said, "What is it?" I said, "I think I saw something back there." It took DB a couple hundred meters to slow down and turn the vehicle around. We came upon the same spot, but the figure was gone. I told him what I saw. To me, it looked like a tall orangutan, at least 7 to 8 feet tall. It had its right arm extended out against a tree, and you could see the reddish hair hanging from its arm. It must have been at least 200 feet away, but I could see it clear as day. I knew what it was. It was the big man. I wasn't scared, just excited to see it. I said a prayer that day. There have been reported sightings around my area of Opaskwayak Cree Nation in the Pas. Some reports are on the BFRO website. Thank you, SB. This next story comes from Melissa in Oregon. These events occurred between 2013 and 2021 at Mount St. Helens, Washington. This follows an earlier report called "I Could Hear Footsteps Coming Up to My Tent." Hi, Lynn. I wanted to share another experience I've had with a Sasquatch clan or tribe in the area where I camp on Mount St. Helens in Washington. Let me give a quick background for reference. This year will be the 10th year I've camped in the same spot on the mountain. The Sasquatch there now recognize me and my camp and do not hesitate to come by, always at night. I wonder why they've never tried to communicate directly with me, as I've heard in other reports, but they've never really been shy about snooping through my camp when I'm in my tent at night. This experience happened in the early years, maybe the second year up there. In the last video, I mentioned one the size of a 12-year-old that I feel was a girl. She babysits her little siblings at times. This is the first time I saw one of her siblings. As it usually starts, I'm in the tent, ready to sleep. I'm lying there, just listening. I soon hear sneaking footsteps approaching. Most of the time, I hear quiet whispering along with the approach. If I may jump back to earlier in the day, I want to tell you about the agate I found in the creek. It had been used for smashing other rocks. I still don't know what they get out of this, but I hear it often. I had taken this agate to my tent for analysis. Feeling a tad guilty, I placed my hiking boots on top of it behind my tent before going to bed. I had also tied the line from my rainfly on the side of my tent up tight and high to my laundry line. This was to let air flow through the tent. It also gave me a great view of the meadow outside during the daytime. So as I lay there listening, I hear them approach. Next, I hear the distinct sound of my boot laces hitting the back corner of my tent. I know my boot has been picked up and the laces are whipping my tent. This goes on for not 2 minutes, but I am thrilled. Not long after that, I hear sounds at the side where the fly line is tied high. I hear a boing, twanging sound. That line is being pulled and released. I can see the movement of my tent walls going back and forth as this is going on. I'm amazed at the boldness of this. Whatever is doing this, they know I'm in here, awake. Fear? Thrill? I can't say which, but it was awesome. I'm thinking this is coming from the 12-year-old I had seen before. But then I hear a short giggle and a small Sasquatch the size of a 5-year-old jogs past the front window, slapping the peak of the rainfly on his way by. This window is on the front door of the tent. It is the largest, longest one, and there's no mistaking what I saw. Immediately I say, "Ha, I saw you. You're busted." Yes, I'm a talker, especially when much emotion is involved. Then, of course, I saw and heard nothing more that night. But through the years, I've heard who I think is this little guy, laughing, mocking me, and now doing fantastic owl calls. I believe he knows me and comes to my camp to do owl calls of the female barred owl, which is a story for another day because I need to get to chores now. I hope everyone enjoyed this. As benign as it is, none of my stories are terrifying at all, but they are some of the best times in my long life. Until next time, Melissa in Oregon. It happened in the summer of 2006. I've had other experiences since, but none as life-changing as those in that summer. While attending college in Moscow, Idaho, I applied for and accepted a job with the Idaho DEQ. I would be working with 2 other young men on a beneficial use reconnaissance team out of Grangeville, Idaho. Our job was to visit the rivers and drainages along the Selway, Clearwater, and Lochsa rivers, collecting fish, water, and algae samples. We were given a truck, 2 weeks of training, maps, cooking equipment, and a handshake, then cut loose to do our job in the northern Idaho wilderness. The 2 young men I worked with were both from Washington State. I was the only Idaho native. One guy was a former Marine who didn't talk much. I'll call him L. The other was a very young man from Seattle, with no outdoor experience at all. I'll call him R. It was towards the end of our summer, and we had gelled into a good work routine. We worked so well that we could easily cover 3 rivers and still have time to fly fish the beautiful streams and rivers we were so blessed to be surrounded by. One night, while camping near the Idaho-Montana border, we arrived late in the day and were setting up camp when I smelled huckleberries. Following the scent to a thick patch of berries along the road behind camp, I noticed footprints in the loose dust that covered the road. R passed them off as belonging to a hippie who was out picking berries. However, this didn't make sense. There were only our tire tracks on the dead-end road, and the size of the footprints was odd. There were also more than one set of prints. L agreed they might have come from wood-dwelling hippies. He said, "Just because they're big doesn't mean there's something to wonder at." Despite L being a big guy and one set of prints being about the size of his size 13 foot, it never made any sense to me. The tracks came from the woods to the berry bushes and then back into the woods. The next evening, we broke camp and moved a few drainages west, making camp on a sandbar of the Skull Creek River. We went fly fishing for our supper and brought our catch back to camp to cook on our little Coleman camp stove, set upon a plastic bifold table in the middle of camp. After dinner, we were all beat and agreed to do the dishes in the morning. While getting ready for bed, R was in the woods brushing his teeth when he came running back to camp, yelling about something huge in the woods. I had never seen R like that. He was truly terrified. He said it was dark and huge. I passed it off as maybe a moose. R insisted it wasn't a moose. It moved like a man trying to hide. He was on the verge of hysterics, starting to yell. L came stomping out of his pup tent, pistol in hand. We weren't allowed to carry firearms as state employees on state business, but we did anyway due to the nature of our job. L walked a few paces into the woods and fired off almost his entire clip. Then he told both of us to shut the f*** up and hit the rack, which we promptly did, though R was a nervous wreck. Little did we know, things would only escalate from there. Around 1:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a crash. I knew right away it was our mess from dinner. Thinking it was either a bear or raccoons, I put on my headlamp and stepped outside. What I saw confused me. Our camp table was still standing, but nothing was on it. I looked around and found our cookware, pans, and dishes lying yards away from the table and along the riverbank. As I crouched down to pick up our forks and plates from the water's edge, I began to wonder, what could have done this? Raccoons would have scattered things, and bears would have knocked over the table. Most troubling, both would have left evidence. With that thought, I stood up and walked back to the table, scouring the sandbar for any tracks that weren't made by my crew. I found none. I looked back at the debris scattered across the shore, and a horrible feeling overcame me. Whatever did this had placed an arm across the table and strongly swept everything off, leaving the table standing and our gear spread out in an arcing line along the river. That's when the horrible, helpless feeling struck me. I wasn't alone. And whatever had done this was watching me. I couldn't see anything in the shadows of my headlamp, but I could feel it. Growing up in the southeastern Rockies of Idaho, I was literally raised in the woods. They were and are my second home, a place to feel free and safe despite the wildlife. But that night, I realized everything I was raised to believe was wrong. The comforting illusion that I was somehow in control was shattered. I have never, to this day, been so afraid, even in the woods. All I could do was put my head down, walk back to my tent, zip it up, and hide in my sleeping bag, listening for anything other than the drone of the Skull Creek River. I was startled awake by L. He was yelling for answers. His tent had been dismantled and placed on top of him, poles and all. R began to explain that Daniel, me, had been walking around the camp all night. I got up and clarified what I had been doing. They both heard the crash but fell back asleep. R said he heard me walking around late into the night and figured I was cleaning up the mess. After I explained what I'd seen and done, L chalked it up to an animal and hurried us to pack up and get to work. That's when I discovered my cooler, which held all our food, was missing. Unable to find it, we loaded up and headed upriver. We were about 2 miles from camp when R began to feel ill and went into the trees. I waited, then heard him calling for me. A few hundred yards from the river, I found R and a large area scattered with wrappers and cans. I quickly realized this was what was left of my food. We eventually found my cooler in 2 pieces. It wasn't locked, just a large plastic cooler for shift work, yet it had been torn apart. There were no claw or teeth marks on the foam or plastic, just blunt indentations, especially on the tins of kipper snacks. No sign of canine teeth. We packed up the mess and got back to work. R was visibly scared, constantly looking around. We didn't speak of what we thought had happened. We just worked. For our final night out, we camped on a logged-out section of a mountain overlooking the entire valley. As part of our ritual, we shared a bottle of wine. That's when the howling and screaming started. It was coming from the area around Skull Creek, where we had just been. It couldn't have been more than a mile away. It sounded like nothing I've ever heard, maybe closest to a very large, deep-voiced gibbon. At first, we thought it might be some backwoods jokers, but we'd been out there for 10 and hadn't seen another soul. No signs, no vehicles on any visible roads. The sound haunted me. It still does, and I cannot explain it. It wasn't any animal I've ever known. The howls and screams continued for hours, but never came closer. We settled in and eventually fell asleep. What happened next may have been the most troubling part of the entire trip. We packed up and returned to Grangeville to meet our DEQ field supervisor, transfer our samples, and debrief. During the chat, L was reluctant to mention anything, likely due to the firearm incident. But our supervisor was unfazed. After we recounted everything, the camp incident, the destroyed cooler and food, the howls and screams, he wasn't surprised. In fact, he calmly said, "Almost every 3 years, one of my crews has a visit." He followed that with a stern warning. As long as we worked for the state, we were not to jump to conclusions or speak of any cryptids. Doing so would result in immediate termination. That was the most serious I'd ever seen him. He was normally a jovial, family-oriented, straightforward guy. But something in his tone told me this was more than a random event. It was something he had rehearsed out of necessity, born of prior experiences. That cemented it for me. This was a Sasquatch, and the state of Idaho knew it. He never commented further, and to this day, I've never been able to get more from him about what happened to other crews in the same area. That's how the 3 of us ended our summer in the woods of Idaho County. We've since graduated college, started families, and gone our separate ways. But even now, in chats on Facebook, we still talk about and speculate from the safety of our homes what followed us that week. My story happened back in July of 2001. I was at scout camp. We were high up in the mountains in eastern Utah. The scout camp is called East Fork of the Bear. This was the second year I had been there. This year, I was getting my Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, so they took us one night out from the scout camp, a mile north. We had to make a shelter and look for food. I went with 5 others from the troop. 2 went off to make another camp about 50 feet from us. The rest of us found a large tree that had fallen over. We found other smaller fallen trees, took them over, and leaned them on it to make a shelter for the night. It took 6 of us to pick these trees up, plus a dad who came to help us. We put a tarp over the top and all crawled in and went to sleep. I was by the exit to the shelter, as I have to get up in the middle of the night a lot to go pee. So the night starts out slow, with all of us scared. We didn't want to be there. Well, they started to tell scary stories, and I really got scared and started having to go to the bathroom more. After about 4 hours, everyone was asleep, and I finally got up to use the restroom. As I'm looking around me, I saw a huge figure staring at me. I couldn't make out a face, as it was too dark, and it was about 30 feet away. It was about twice my height, so around 9 feet tall, and was wide with long arms and legs that wouldn't go straight. It also looked like it had no neck. Well, as any brave 13-year-old would do, I got back in my sleeping bag and closed my eyes. The creature came over and found the 4 of us. One of the boys heard it coming and started to wake everyone up. He started crying. That's when it pushed our shelter over. Remember, it took 7 of us to even move those logs. It did it on its own. We all started getting out of the shelter and making a lot of noise. The scout leaders started yelling, and every adult started to run toward where we were. Just as fast as it came, it was gone. It made one crash sound as it left. Then it was quiet. I didn't see it up close. I only heard it. When the scoutmasters got to us, they thought we were pulling their legs. They told us to shut up and go back to sleep. After that, none of us went to sleep and no one wanted to talk about it. We just left early the next morning back for the main camp. On July 15th, 1994, at Bear Scout Camp in Summit County, Utah, we were walking down a trail at night. It was a full moon, or pretty big anyhow. There was a stream, and on the other side I saw a hominid. It was walking on 2 feet easily. Not a bear, not a gorilla, not a chimp, not any ape I've ever seen. I'm very, very sure of that. It was either a man or Bigfoot. I don't think it was a man. It doesn't fit very well. I only saw him a few seconds out of the dark shadows under the trees, but it was so obvious. It was just about 50 to 60 feet across the stream, walking along the bare side of an embankment where it sloped up from the stream bottom. And I didn't say anything at first. It was just so right there. I assumed the guy in front of me saw it and had taken it into account. We kind of looked to him as the leader since he was a few years older. Anyway, when he didn't say anything, I began to suspect he didn't see it. I think he was humming a song and wasn't paying much attention. I was about to speak up when the guy behind me started to say something too. He had heard a noise up ahead. He pointed to where the creature had gone. It had walked across the slope and down toward the stream in front of us. There it made a noise above the sound of the small stream. It sounded like a rock clacking against another, like when you step on a rock and it clacks into another one. He was worried about what that sound was. I was all excited and tried to tell them what I saw. We all got nervous. We yelled, but there was no answer. We were extremely scared. We were working as merit badge counselors at a scout camp. When you see another person up there, you say hi because they're all fun-loving, friendly scouts or scoutmasters. This creature passed very near us, easily in range for a howdy or hello, but it didn't answer and didn't talk. We backtracked through the meadow we were in at the time, into the lodgepole pines at the other end. We sat in the dark until about 1 a.m. We figured the creature went past at about 10. We imagined all sorts of things sneaking up on us in the dark. We finally each got big sticks, and Danny got his knife, and we went the rest of the way down the trail, ready to attack anything that moved. We were extremely scared. Let me describe the creature. It was tall, seemed about 6 to 7 feet. It was all one dark color. It walked surely, quickly, and quietly. I noticed it brushed a sapling with its hand as it walked by it. It had a high crown. It was built stoutly in the torso, hips, and thighs. I don't think a person that fat could move so smoothly like it did. It also didn't look like a fat person. It seemed proportional, like that was how it was supposed to be. The thighs were wide and went up to a curved, large buttock. It just wasn't like a person. It was bigger, but seemed, the only word I could think of, firm. Fit. Not fat, not inhibiting. I'm a very methodical, detail-oriented type person. I've loved nature all my life and know what the different animals look like. It was not a bear or an escaped ape. It moved in a distinct way. It sort of twisted its hips so the outline of the thigh and buttocks changed. We didn't find any tracks or such the night we saw it. We were too scared to go looking. The next day, we had to do our job, which took all day. It had rained also before we had a chance to look for tracks, and we thought that any tracks would have washed away. The Wellsville Mountains are a designated wilderness area with no roads, very few trails, and an abundance of wildlife, including mule deer. They are considered to be some of the steepest and most rugged mountains in northern Utah. I was 21 and had just returned about 6 months before from living in Japan for 2 years. The general season mule deer hunt had just opened, and I decided to go hunting one day after my college classes had ended. I remember thinking how stupid it was that I had to go to class during the hunt and didn't want to. While I was driving, sliding my car up a snowy road, I turned off the paved road onto a farm road, went past a house that was under construction, and parked in the small trailhead lot. Instead of going up the mountain, I walked a short distance around a field and sat down on a steep slope overlooking a valley, a few hills, and some trees. I sat looking through my binoculars at the deer bedded down in the trees, wondering why they wouldn't get up and forage in the trees for nuts or grasses. As I sat watching, I heard a loud crashing sound coming from the trees nearer to the house and barn that was being built. It may have even been watching them, as it was very close to the house. I looked through my binoculars and could see a large black shape moving through heavy cover. At first I thought it was a black bear, but as I watched it, it didn't have the bouncing motion that bears have when they run because their front legs are shorter than their rear legs. It was moving very gracefully. I watched as it plowed through thick brush like a bull until it made it to more open ground in the trees and noticed how strange it really was. It was moving on 2 legs and moving fast. I looked and saw all the deer running, unfortunately in the other direction, and turned back to the animal. I watched in amazement as it went straight into a massive stand of buckbrush that I couldn't have gotten through with a machete. It kept moving at a phenomenal pace and was gone over a ridge in just a few seconds. I've hunted and hiked alone for years and come toe-to-toe with both black bears and mountain lions and never, ever been that afraid before. I immediately put a bullet in my rifle and backed away from the spot, never turning my back. I got in my car and left. My dad, brother, and brother-in-law keep wanting to go back there because we've seen deer there, but I've never gone back. Even when I hunt the other end of the Wellsville Mountains, I stay with someone because of the experience. After investigator Todd Strong interviewed the witness, the following can be added. The witness was familiar with the area and had hunted and scouted there before. He has been hunting since he was 14 years old. It was a clear afternoon, and he observed the animal for 30 seconds. He could clearly see definition in the animal's biceps, triceps, and abdominals. It was very muscular, clearly athletic, and bulldozed its way uphill through 10-foot-tall oak brush with its arm covering its face for protection. The action looked like a massive football player plowing through the line. The witness doubted he could even walk through the thick scrub oak, let alone run through it. Thanks for listening. I think you might find this video of interest as well. If you've had an encounter or sighting of a Sasquatch and would like your story told here, please email me, Lynn Smith, at bigfootcasefilesmail.com. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Welcome to Bigfoot Case Files Classic, Bigfoot Encounter Reports, 1960s, Part 4. Near Clipper, Washington, mid-June 1968. Working as a logger 9 miles east of Clipper, Frank Lawrence Jr. of Marietta told John Green he saw male and female creatures and a child, all covered with black hair. He estimated the male at 6 feet, the female a little shorter with pendulous breasts, and the child about 5 feet and more lightly built. Mr. Lawrence said he was lying down eating lunch when he heard a whistle and stood up, seeing the 3 creatures about 100 yards off. They did not run away, but he did. North of Stevens Pass, Washington. Summer 1968. Darrell Johnson of Wenatchee wrote to Roger Patterson that 2 relatives of his found 18-inch tracks on a trail just north of Stevens Pass, so fresh that where they crossed some mud near a creek, water was still oozing into them. Tandem Valley, west of Yakima, November 1968. Roger Patterson recorded that 2 college students parking at 2 a.m. in the moonlight saw an 8 or 9 foot Sasquatch which advanced within a dozen feet of one of them after he got out of the car. Prints were seen and photographed the next day. West of Orion, Washington, December 21st, 1968. A Kettle Falls man described to John Green tracks about 14 inches long in deep new snow beside a mountain road. He thought at the time they were bear tracks and did not examine them, but they had a stride of between 3 and 4 feet. Near Skamania, March 5th, 1969. Don Cox of Washougal, going fishing at 4 a.m., saw a fur-covered human form run across the road in front of his car and up a high bank in 2 steps. Renee DeHinden and John Green found a few probable tracks in forest litter on the top of the bank. This story, reported in newspapers, started a general search in the area, which turned up at least 2 sets of tracks. Near Carson, Washington, March 9, 1969. Mr. and Mrs. John Durrell found 18-inch tracks with a 54-inch stride in the snow on their property, according to the Skamania County Pioneer. 2 weeks later, after these tracks were reported, County Sheriff Bill Klossner cast a 22-inch track there. The tracks were near the lower part of Bear Creek, about 4 miles northeast of Carson and less than 20 miles from the scene of the Cox sighting. Near Stevenson, March 1969. After seeing the track cast by the sheriff, Ed McClarney and Marvin Morash headed into the backcountry in McClarney's 4-wheel drive rig. They went as far as the snow would permit, then took off into the mountains. 7 miles from any habitation, they discovered big footprints emerging out of a canyon, crossing a snow-covered forest trail, proceeding through a logged-over area or clear-cut, and headed toward the lava beds. There were no snowmobile tracks, no ski tracks, no snowshoe tracks, and no people tracks of any kind. They returned convinced that something out of the ordinary had certainly been there. Near Skamania, March 1969. The Pioneer Special Bigfoot Edition, summer 1969, reports that Mrs. Ellen Satterthwaite saw the legs and torso of a huge hairy creature cross the quiet country road in front of her car at night as she was driving home. Her headlights were too low to show the head. Near Orient, spring 1969. Mrs. Betty Peterson, then living at Kettle Falls, described to John Green 2 black creatures, both over 7 feet tall and one a head taller than the other, which she saw run across the highway just south of Boulder Creek, south of Orient, about 11 a.m. They came from the direction of the river and ran upright, leaning forward a little. Their speed and size were impressive. Near Marietta, spring 1969. A sailor from a U.S. submarine wrote to Dr. Steve Pauley, a San Diego Sasquatch researcher, about a sighting late at night near a church under construction. He said he and 3 other people were sitting in a car when one of them saw motion 75 to 100 feet in front of them. They switched on the lights and illuminated a white furred animal, 7 to 8 feet high, standing erect with its arms hanging almost to its knees. It immediately headed into the woods. Near Carson, April 1969. K.L. Kramer of Gresham, Oregon, wrote to John Green that he and 3 other men had photographed what appeared to be 20-inch tracks with a 5-foot stride about 20 miles northeast of Carson, near Hoquiam, July 26, 1969. Deputy Sheriff Verlin Harrington, driving home at 2:35 a.m., saw a creature on the road north of Hoquiam. He described it to John Green as erect, very tall, and covered with dark brown hair. The face was dark and leathery, there was a flat nose, no snout, and the creature had human-type breasts and long, muscular legs. He got a spotlight on it and got out of the car before it walked down the bank off the road. West of Lake Chelan, July 1969. On an alpine meadow 25 miles northwest of Ardenvohr, by an isolated lake on the North Fork of the Entiat River, Mike Wolfe and Pat Craig of Wenatchee found tracks 15 to 17 inches long and 6 inches wide, with double a human stride. Near Cub Lake, East Darrington, August 1969. Mark Mize and Marshall Cabe of Darrington told Dick Grover that they were chased back to their camp by 3 Sasquatches. The following is part of a Seattle Times story printed August 13, 1969. Mize and Cabe said they were camping near Cub Lake with 6 other teenagers on August 4th. They left the party and hiked about a mile from the campsite. Mize carried a .22 caliber rifle and Cabe had a fishing pole. Mize said that at about 8:30 p.m., while there was still daylight, they saw what they first thought was a bear or a stump, but then it raised its arm and made a motion like a human for them to come toward it. Then it began to move, and 2 others appeared from behind it. Mark said he and Marshall began to run back to the camp, and the 3 creatures, running gracefully on 2 legs, chased them. At one point we looked back, and they were 50 to 75 yards behind us, he said. I'm sure they could have caught us if they wanted to. The creatures stopped chasing them as they approached the camp. He described them as hairy, with fingers and toes, and hairless faces, more human than ape. With heads that dipped in and out, Mark said all 8 of them sat up all night around a campfire and heard shrill screams, like a woman screaming in panic, but more shrill, 3 times. They reported the incident to a Forest Service ranger. Mark said the others disbelieved them at first, but became convinced when they later heard the screams. Near North Bend, summer 1969 sign. Robert Parker of Bellevue told John Green he and several friends saw a brown creature of great size walk upright across a hillside above the creek where they were fishing, north of Mount Si. He first noticed it when it screamed. Near Stevenson, September 15, 1969. The Skamania County Pioneer, September 19, 1969, reported that 2 tracks, 15.5 inches long and 9 inches wide, were found at a logging operation on Stevenson Ridge, 5 miles north of town. They were photographed, and one was cast by Sheriff Bill Klossner. 5 Heights near Tacoma, September 30th, 1969. Dick Hancock and Gary Johnson told Dick Grover they saw a Sasquatch run across the road at night and bend a metal sign it hit with its hand. Deception Pass, September 13th, 1969. A man from Anacortes wrote to John Green that his daughter's fiancé, driving home at 2:30 a.m., saw a black-haired animal a bit over 5 feet tall walking erect across the road just north of the Deception Pass Bridge. Near North Bonneville, Mrs. Louise Baxter of Skamania told John Green that while driving 4 miles west of North Bonneville at about 10 p.m., she saw a huge, dark gray, shaggy-furred animal cross the road so close she had to swerve to miss it. The head was above her headlights, but she was greatly impressed with the huge hairy hand, leg, and foot. Southwest of Yakima, October 1969. Ross Hendrich told Roger Patterson he saw 2 Sasquatches while deer hunting. He had stopped for lunch and watched two dark brown creatures, 7 to 9 feet tall, walking up a hill about 150 yards away. They would reach down and grab something from under rocks as they walked. He said he had also seen tracks in the past, once indicating that the thing had carried off an elk he had shot and skinned. Near Fort Lewis, November 1st, 1969. Army Sergeant Lloyd Stringer reported to the sheriff's office that while driving at midnight in fog near St. Clair Lake between Olympia and Fort Lewis, he hit a brown-haired animal about 6 feet tall that was standing on 2 feet. Near Bossburg, November 24th, 1969, tracks were found by the Bossburg garbage dump and at the North Gorge boat launching ramp, more than 17 inches long, with the right foot badly distorted and showing only 4 toes. Renee Dahinden and Bob Titmus both saw some of these. Near Woodland, November 23rd, 1969. The Lewis River News, November 27th, 1969, reported that Charles Kent of Woodland walked out to his car and saw in the moonlight, about 40 yards away, an animal he thought was a bear on its hind legs. When he got others out of the house, it was gone, but on the muddy hillside they found 18 tracks, neither bear nor human, 11 cord inches by 4 inches, which sank in more than twice as far as theirs did. Near Bossburg, December 14th, 1969, Renee Dahinden and Ivan Marks found more than 1,000 prints of the foot creature in snow, leading out of Lake Roosevelt and back in again.